Lisa had been acting distant for months. What she announced at our 25th anniversary dinner made me realize our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way she'd been spacing out during our morning coffee routine, how she'd started going to bed before me every night, the forced smiles when I'd catch her staring off into nothing. But you know how it is when you've been with someone for so long, you tell yourself it's just a rough patch, that work stress or family drama is getting to them. You make excuses because the alternative is too scary to consider. The restaurant was perfect that night. Soft lighting, our favorite corner table, the same place we'd celebrated our 10th, 15th, and 20th anniversaries. I'd even worn the tie she bought me last Christmas, the one with tiny sailboats that she said reminded her of our honeymoon. She looked beautiful in that navy dress, the one that brought out her eyes, but there was something hollow in her expression that made my stomach twist. We'd made it through the appetizers with small talk about the kids, about her sister's new job, about the neighbor's dog that kept getting into our yard. Normal stuff. Safe stuff. But I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Her hands were shaking slightly when she reached for her wine glass, and she kept glancing around the restaurant like she was looking for an escape route. Then, right after the waiter brought our entrees, she stood up. Just like that. No warning, no transition from our conversation about whether we needed to replace the washing machine. She pushed back her chair with a scraping sound that made half the restaurant turn to look at us, and I felt my heart drop into my shoes. The words that came out of her mouth felt like ice water being poured over my head. She told me in a voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear that she had never actually loved me. That she had only married me for financial security. That she was tired of pretending and wanted a divorce to be with someone she truly cared about. The restaurant went dead silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on us, could practically hear the collective intake of breath from other diners who had just witnessed what they thought was the public destruction of a marriage. A woman at the table next to us actually gasped audibly. The waiter who had been approaching with the pepper mill stopped dead in his tracks and backed away slowly. She kept going, her voice getting stronger and more confident with each terrible word. She detailed how she had been faking happiness for decades, how every laugh, every kiss, every moment of intimacy had been a performance. She talked about how exhausting it was to pretend to care about my interests, my dreams, my fears. She said she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of living a lie. I sat there feeling like I was watching a car accident in slow motion. This was my wife, the woman who had held my hand through my dad's funeral, who had stayed up all night with me when the kids were sick, who still left little notes in my lunch bag after all these years. But the person speaking seemed like a stranger wearing her face. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to keep them still. I felt hot and cold at the same time, like I was coming down with the flu. The humiliation was overwhelming, not just because of what she was saying, but because she was saying it here, in front of all these people. Some were trying to pretend they weren't listening, others were openly staring with their mouths hanging open. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed, all the moments over the past few months that suddenly made terrible sense. The way she'd been working late more often, the phone calls she'd take in the other room, the new clothes she'd bought but never seemed to wear around me. Had there really been someone else this whole time? How could I have been so blind? Then something shifted. She sat down abruptly, reaching across the table to grab my hand with both of hers. Her touch was warm and familiar, nothing like the cold stranger who had just been standing there destroying everything we'd built together. She looked me straight in the eyes, and I saw tears starting to form. That's when she told me the truth. She explained that what she had just said was the worst possible thing she could imagine saying to me. She wanted me to understand that the complete opposite was true, that she loved me more after 25 years than she had when we first met. She said she wanted to renew our vows. The relief hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt lightheaded, like I might pass out right there in my chair. But underneath the relief was confusion, and underneath that was anger. What kind of person does something like that? What kind of test was this? She started explaining through her tears that she'd been having what she called a crisis of gratitude. She said she'd been taking our relationship for granted, going through the motions without really appreciating what we had. She'd been reading about couples who had lost their spark, who were just roommates going through the motions, and she'd started to panic that maybe that was us. The idea for this bizarre dinner theater had come to her a few weeks ago, she said. She wanted to shock herself into remembering how much she had to lose. She wanted to feel the terror of potentially losing me, to remind herself why she fell in love with me in the first place. She thought that by saying the worst possible things, she would understand how much the best things meant to her. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or walk out. The whole restaurant was still watching us, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of performance art or if they'd just witnessed the strangest marriage counseling session in history. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out. Someone was definitely recording this mess. Update 1. I've been getting a lot of messages asking what happened next, so I figured I'd update you all. That night at the restaurant was just the beginning of what turned out to be the most complicated few months of my marriage. After her explanation, I honestly didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to appreciate the sentiment behind what she'd done, the idea that she loved me so much she needed to imagine losing me to fully understand it. But another part of me was furious that she'd put me through that emotional torture, especially in public. We sat there for another hour, barely touching our food, trying to have a normal conversation while everyone around us kept stealing glances. I felt like we were animals in a zoo. Finally, I suggested we get the check and continue this at home, where we could actually talk without an audience. The car ride home was awkward as hell. She kept apologizing, saying she knew it was extreme but that she'd been feeling so disconnected from her own feelings that she needed something dramatic to wake herself up. I kept oscillating between understanding her point and feeling completely manipulated. When we got home, she showed me a journal she'd been keeping for the past few months. Page after page of her trying to work through her feelings, questioning whether she was happy, whether we were happy, whether we were just staying together out of habit. Reading it was like getting a window into her mind that I'd never had before. The thing that struck me most was how scared she was. Not of me, but of the idea that she might be wasting both our lives by staying in a marriage that had become routine. She wrote about watching her sister go through a bitter divorce and wondering if that would be us in 10 years. She wrote about seeing couples at the grocery store who looked like they couldn't stand each other and panicking that we might be heading in that direction. But then there were other entries that made me cry. Pages about how proud she was when I finally got the promotion I'd been working toward for years. Detailed descriptions of the way I make her coffee in the morning, how I always remember to use the blue mug because it's her favorite. Stories about our kids that I'd forgotten, moments that clearly meant the world to her. Reading the journal made me realize that her distance over the past few months hadn't been about falling out of love with me, it had been about falling out of love with the routine we'd built. She wasn't questioning me, she was questioning us and whether we were living our lives or just going through the motions. We stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about everything. About how we'd both been operating on autopilot, about how we'd stopped really seeing each other, about how easy it is to take someone for granted when they're always there. We talked about our dreams, our fears, our regrets. We talked about things we hadn't discussed in years. By the time we finally went to bed, something had shifted between us. Not fixed exactly, but opened up. Like we'd been living in a house with all the curtains drawn and someone had finally let in some light. The weird thing is, her crazy stunt at the restaurant actually worked in a way. Not the way she'd planned, maybe, but it forced us to confront the fact that we'd been sleepwalking through our marriage. It made us both realize how much we stood to lose if we kept taking each other for granted. But here's where things got really complicated. A few days later, I was at the grocery store when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, my college roommate's wife. She started asking about the anniversary dinner because, apparently, someone had posted a video of it online. Not just any video, a really clear one that showed both our faces and caught most of what my wife had said. I felt sick to my stomach. Bad enough that half a restaurant had witnessed our private moment, but now it was out there for anyone to see. When I got home and showed my wife, she broke down completely. She hadn't considered that possibility at all. The video had been shared in several local community groups with captions like "Crazy Lady Destroys Her Marriage in Public" and "When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong." People were making jokes about it, creating memes, adding their own commentary about what they thought was happening. Some people were actually defending her, saying she was brave for being honest, but most of the comments were pretty brutal. Our kids found out about it when their friends started sending them links. Our neighbors started looking at us funny. My wife's workplace got wind of it somehow and she had to have an uncomfortable conversation with her supervisor about maintaining professionalism even in personal matters. The whole thing spiraled way beyond what either of us had imagined. What was supposed to be a private moment of realization between two people became a public spectacle that affected our entire family. Update 2. The internet fame was a nightmare that lasted about 3 weeks. Just when we thought it was dying down, some influencer picked up the video and made a reaction video that got millions of views. Suddenly we were being discussed on podcasts, in relationship advice columns, and in comment sections all over social media. The worst part was that everyone had an opinion about our marriage based on a 2-minute video taken out of context. Some people thought my wife was a hero for being honest about her feelings. Others thought she was cruel and manipulative. Some relationship experts used us as an example of what not to do, while others praised her for finding an unconventional way to reconnect with her emotions. My wife stopped leaving the house for a while. She'd always been a private person, and having strangers analyze her most vulnerable moment was torture for her. She kept apologizing, saying she never meant for it to affect our whole family, that she'd been selfish and stupid. But something unexpected happened during those weeks when we were basically hiding from the world together. We got really good at talking to each other. When you can't go out, can't see friends, can't do normal things because you're afraid of being recognized, you end up spending a lot of time just sitting together. We started cooking together every night, something we hadn't done in years. We'd put on music and actually pay attention to each other while we chopped vegetables and stirred sauces. We started taking walks in the early morning when fewer people were around, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. Our kids, who are both in college now, came home for a weekend to check on us. They were worried about the video, but they were also curious about what had really been going on with us. We ended up having the most honest conversation we'd ever had as a family about marriage, relationships, and what it means to really know someone. Our daughter told us she'd been worried about us for a while, that when she came home for holidays we seemed like we were just going through the motions. Our son said he'd noticed that we never seemed to laugh together anymore, that we were always busy with separate things. It was hard to hear, but it confirmed what we'd both been feeling. During that conversation, something clicked for me. I realized that my wife's restaurant stunt, as crazy and misguided as it was, had been her way of trying to save our marriage. She'd been drowning in routine and comfort, and she was terrified that we were slowly drifting apart without either of us noticing. I started thinking about my own behavior over the past few years. How often had I really looked at her, really listened to her? How many times had I given her my full attention instead of half listening while scrolling through my phone? How many conversations had we had that were just logistics? Who was picking up groceries, when the car needed an oil change, what time the kids were coming home? The viral video situation forced us to be honest about the fact that we'd been living parallel lives instead of a shared life. We were good roommates, good co-parents, good financial partners. But somewhere along the way we'd stopped being lovers, friends, companions. So we made some changes. Big ones. We decided to take a month off work. We'd both been saving vacation time for years and go on a cross-country road trip. Just the two of us, no schedule, no reservations, no plan except to drive and talk and remember what it felt like to be curious about each other. The video attention had mostly died down by then, and we figured getting out of town would be good for both of us. We packed up our car with snacks and playlists and drove west with no destination in mind. That trip changed everything. When you're stuck in a car together for hours at a time, you run out of safe small talk pretty quickly. We ended up sharing stories we'd never told each other, dreams we'd given up on, fears we'd been carrying alone. We laughed until our stomachs hurt at stupid roadside attractions. We got lost and argued about directions and then laughed about that too. One night, somewhere in Colorado, we were sitting outside our motel room looking at more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. My wife turned to me and said she finally understood what she'd been trying to say at that restaurant. She said she'd been so afraid of losing me that she'd stopped really having me. That's when I knew we were going to be okay. Not just okay, better than we'd been in years. Final update. It's been 8 months since the anniversary dinner that broke the internet, and I wanted to give you all a final update on how everything turned out. First, the practical stuff. The video eventually got taken down from most platforms after we had a friend who works in social media help us file privacy complaints. It still pops up occasionally, but it's not the viral sensation it was for those few weeks. Most people have moved on to other internet drama, which is exactly what we were hoping for. We did end up renewing our vows, but not in the way my wife originally envisioned. Instead of a big ceremony, we had a tiny gathering in our backyard with just our kids and a few close friends. No fancy dress, no elaborate speeches, just a simple exchange of new promises we'd written together during our road trip. The promises were different from our original wedding vows. Less about forever and always, more about paying attention and staying curious. We promised to keep talking to each other, to keep asking questions, to notice when we were drifting into autopilot. We promised to forgive each other for being human, for making mistakes, for occasionally needing dramatic gestures to remember what we had. The biggest change has been in how we structure our daily life. We instituted what we call phone-free time every evening, an hour where we put all devices away and just focus on each other. Sometimes we cook, sometimes we walk, sometimes we just sit on the porch and watch the world go by. It sounds simple, but it's made a huge difference. We also started doing something we call appreciation rounds once a week. We take turns telling each other 3 specific things we noticed and appreciated about the other person that week. Not big gestures or major accomplishments, just small things. The way she makes sure my coffee is ready when I get up. The way I always check that the doors are locked before bed so she doesn't have to worry about it. It's amazing how much you can take for granted when you live with someone. How many small kindnesses and considerations become invisible over time. The appreciation rounds have helped us both stay aware of all the ways we take care of each other without even thinking about it. Our relationship isn't perfect now, no relationship is. We still have bad days, we still get on each other's nerves, we still have to work at staying connected. But we're working at it together now instead of just hoping it will work itself out. The weirdest part is that people still occasionally recognize us when we're out together. Usually they want to know if we're still married, if we worked things out, if the whole thing was staged. We've gotten good at politely declining to discuss it, but I have to admit there's something surreal about being known for the worst and best moment of your marriage happening simultaneously. My wife still cringes when people bring up the video, but she's also proud of what came out of it. She says she's glad she found a way to wake us both up even if the method was completely bonkers. She jokes that she should write a relationship advice book called How to Save Your Marriage by Almost Destroying It in Public. Looking back, I think what happened to us could happen to any couple that's been together for a long time. You get comfortable, you stop trying as hard, you assume the other person will always be there so you don't need to actively choose them every day. You mistake familiarity for intimacy and routine for stability. The scary thing is how close we came to losing something really good without even realizing it was slipping away. If she hadn't done something dramatic to get our attention, we might have just continued drifting until we ended up as one of those couples who stay together but aren't really happy, who share a house but not a life. I'm not recommending that anyone else try my wife's method of marriage renovation. There are definitely less traumatic ways to reconnect with your partner. But I am grateful that she cared enough about us to risk looking crazy, to risk humiliating herself, to risk everything on the chance that we could find our way back to each other. Our 26th anniversary is coming up in a few months, and we're already planning how to celebrate. Somewhere quiet, definitely. Somewhere private. Somewhere we can focus on each other without worrying about becoming internet famous again. But this time, we won't need any dramatic gestures or shocking announcements. We'll just need to keep doing what we've been doing, paying attention, staying curious, and choosing each other every single day. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding the perfect person, they're about becoming the right person for someone else and letting them become the right person for you over and over again for as long as you both shall live.